email, or do you want me, because I normally get email and I don't give.
Yeah, just email it here.
Okay.
And just include.
All right. Kristen and Sophie and Katie, you think we should get started? It is a lot of content to get through, so.
Yeah, I think we can go for it.
Great. All right. Give me just one moment to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. And can everyone see the slides? Great.
Yeah.
I think I see one thumbs. Okay, a couple thumbs up. Great. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We're excited to talk to you today about the Module 2 system, which will be very similar to Module 3, but we're focusing on Module 2 since the launch is scheduled for October 9th. Today, we're going to go through a lot. So, just know that we are very willing and able to dive into any of these areas with more detail, especially if you have specific use cases for your site you want to talk through. We're going to be available to talk about that. But we're going to go over the system setup overall, transitioning from Module 1 to Module 2. There is a new user interface for the participants we'll go through briefly, and then we'll really dig into the Module 2 flow and process and hit on these key points you can see here on the screen. And sorry, this visual is a little hard to read, but a lot to go through. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We are recording this so that we can post it online as well. And again, just let us know if you have as a follow-up to this, if you have any additional questions or details you want to dive into, we're happy to do that. All right, anything else we should say, Kristen, before we jump in?
I don't think so.
Great. Okay, so at a very high level, a lot of you, I'm going to make the assumption, are familiar with the Module 1 setup. So for the sake of time, we're going to focus really on what things are different, but touch on every piece of this. So Module 1 is a separate project in REDCap from the Module 2 and 3 project. That was done intentionally for a number of reasons. So moving from Module 1 to Module 2 and 3 project, we will talk about. And once you get into the Module 2 and 3 project, there are 3 arms. The first arm is the screening arm, and that's where you'll do all activities while the participant is still deciding or still thinking through whether they want to do Module 2 or Module 3. And then the Module 2 arm is for all activities for Module 2, including eligibility. So the first arm will be everything through consent. Then after consent, you'll move into the arms for the different activities related to the module. And you can see a screenshot here what that ends up looking like in the system. So in order to move someone from Module 1 to Module 2 to 3, there are a couple of things that have to happen in the Module 1 system. So the Part 2 screener was released not at the same time that Module 1 started. So most participants do not have the Part 2 screener filled out. If you're not familiar with that form, it contains some key questions about whether or not this participant is a good fit for the different modules. So that form needs to be either re-reviewed or completed for that participant. Then you'd go to this form that's called the Module 2 and 3 Recommendation Status Form. Within this form, you can see it here on the screen. There are a number of questions that help us really succinctly understand, are they interested in Module 2, Module 3, or are they undecided? And what site are they interested in participating for Module 2 or 3? So it's really important that you pay careful attention to what you enter here, because the institution you list will end up being the data access group or the site pairing in the Module 2 and 3 project. So once you fill this out and check this box at the bottom that says send and save the form, that will be creating the record on the save. So you have to save the form to make that action happen. We actually recommend, there's multiple options when you press save, to hit save and stay. And if you hit save and stay, you will see a button after the action has happened that will take you directly to the Module 2 and 3 project for that individual participant. So hopefully that will be an easy workflow. If you weren't ready to do activities with them at that moment, you do not have to hit that button. You could find them later by going into the project through, clicking into the Module 2 and 3 project from the main menu of projects. So this form is going to be really critical for starting off the process. There is a lot of key data that is being pushed with it at the bottom of the form without even sending it. there's a question that says, would you like to show all data being sent? If you hit yes, you will see a full table of the data being pulled from the Module 1 project that is being pushed over to the Module 2 system. So this can give you a chance to take a look at this and make sure nothing looks off and everything looks good for this participant. This data is critical and it will help drive certain operations in the Module 2 and 3 system. Okay. So now taking a step back, there is a new user experience for the participants. We're still working on some enhancements, but right now what it looks like is very similar to in Module 1 through the notification system and process. A link to all of the forms needed for the Module 2 and 3 process will be sent to the participant as part of the notifications process. So this link, instead of just the list of surveys, will now include this more larger set of menu items. So it will default to the surveys to complete page, which is, that list of surveys that become added to this list based on actions that happen in the system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in future slides. But just like, for example, in Module 1, when you hit consent ready, that adds the consent form to the participant's survey queue. The same process will happen in Module 2. But it's a different look and feel. So if we work through the menu items they have, if they click on upcoming appointments, it will show them all of the data they have that's in the system for their appointments in case they need to refer back to it. The daily reminders, they don't have to click in here to see a daily reminder, but if they wanted to go back and see it, this is an interface where they can go access some information they might need. Alternatively, the reminder system will send them a direct link to these pages that are needed throughout the process, but this is a good sort of place to have information they've gotten in the past. There's also a contact information tab, which I think will be helpful just so that they can click this and see the appropriate people to reach out to. And then the agreements tab, which is, a history of different consents that they have signed so that they can get that more easily and more readily. So you can get access to that. Like I said, the notification system will send that to the participant, but a really easy way to get to this link for your participant, if you're helping them out or if you're trying to work through any sort of troubleshooting problems, is on any survey in the system. When you open it, you can see the survey options button, and that will allow you to click the link to survey queue, which is the REDCap version or the REDCap name for this process in this system. So if you opened any survey, clicked on survey options and clicked on survey queue, that would get you to that individual participant's unique link for them to access through the process. There is a login to get access to any of those screens, and it's the same login as the Module 1 system. So hopefully they'll have gotten used to that by now. And if they have trouble with that, you can always reach out and we're happy to modify it on their behalf if need be. Okay. So before I move on, any questions on that so far?
Oh, she's not supposed to come till 1:30.
Okay, I will muster through. Okay, so great. So now we're going to revisit back to what you're seeing on the screen here is the screening arm. So this means that you'd see this screen if you had completed the Module 2 and 3 recommendation form and clicked on that button that takes you to the Module 2 and 3 project. It will take you to the record homepage for that individual. So here, what you'll see is that there's a limited number of events and fields in the screening arm, again, all based around communicating with the participant, accessing the data that's been pushed. So this operational data form will show all the data that we pushed over from Module 1. We are pasting over the create profile and participant profile data from Module 1, of course, changing the site pairing if needed, because in the profile form, it'll say what site they are linked with. But the key next step would either be to log communications, which you could do in the communications event, or to get started with the whole process. So first, the visit gateway in the consent visit, there is a field for the date and time that you're planning to do the visit. And one big change from module 1 to module 2 based on feedback is we're not using the calendar version of scheduling in module 2 and 3. So in this visit gateway, the date and time you enter will be used by the notification system to drive reminders and everything else you might need. So the first activity that we suspect you will be doing is scheduling the consent visit. So you'd go into the visit gateway and enter that information. And after that, once they were ready to start the process, very similar to module 1, you would use the module 2 consent ready to release the consent for the participant to view in their survey queue and start the whole process. Now, we're not going to dig too much into the module 2 consent process because many of you have already tested your module 2 consent, and it is an exact mirror of how we're doing it in module 1. So we can refer back to those materials as well if anyone has questions. Great. And after you have finished the entire consent process, a form called module start will appear. Now, it's a very simple form. When you go into it, all you will see, well, you won't be able to access it until you have clicked the verify checkbox on the consent checklist that the coordinator finishes to sort of finish out the entire process. And by clicking, I verify the consent has been completed, it opens up this module start form. When you go in there, you're going to check create record in module 2 and do that same process you did for getting to module 1, where you hit save and stay, and this button will appear after you do that action that will take you to the module 2 arm. Similar to before, these buttons are not required to get around the system. We just thought it would make it a little bit easier to help you navigate through the process. Instead, you could go all the way back out to the main master record status dashboard and click into ARM 2 and find the participant that way, but this is here to help you navigate through the system. So when you first start the module, you'll have access to communication forms and eligibility forms. So the key critical step here for unlocking or making the rest of the forms for the visit available is to complete the eligibility form. So there is the audit survey, there's the hemoglobin test, and there's the full eligibility form. So in order to continue past this point, the eligibility form has to indicate, yes, they are eligible. And you can see here that then it opens up a couple of forms to start the first visit and the first diet period. So we're going to get into some key concepts about the diet periods and the forms that sort of help to make it all happen. But you can see here the key forms that are initially available are the diet period gateway, the visit gateway, and the randomization form. Randomization being the dietary assessment randomization. Okay, so this slide is a lot to look at, but we have this new form for each diet period called the diet period gateway. Many of you might have seen some presentations about this probably months ago, but this is going to be a key form for scheduling and driving the notifications. And this is another point where instead of the calendar, because of all the nuances for everything that has to happen, for each diet period, we have this one relatively long but powerful form that is going to help you drive all the different activities of the diet period. So walking through this a little bit, you'll indicate the number of days the participant is going to be in the diet period, because that'll influence a couple of different things. You do have a place to indicate if they discontinue at any point, which we can talk a little bit more about another time. By default, this will be blank. And there's a place to put your visit 1, visit 2 dates, as well as when you plan to do the CGM application date. So that's going to be really critical because the dietary assessments all are aligned to want to match when the participant got the CGM. So that data is going to be really critical for the system to understand when to deliver some of the other pieces. For example, if they were randomized to ASA 24, which they may not be, the ASA 24 is only going to show up the day after that CGM application date to drive that in the process.
Can I ask a just quick question for the CGM?
Sure.
Application? Is that a future date that we're putting in there, or is that as it happens?
Great question. I think operationally it can be a little bit up to you. We know that it you can see on the right-hand side, there's the meal pickup. And a lot of times this is the CGM application date is going to vary depending on when you're planning the meal pickups. So if you're kind of scheduling with the participant everything at once, you could put a future date in there, but it could also be in real time as well.
And I would just add, if it does change, definitely update it because it does feed into the reminders. We just want to make sure that the dates are accurate, to reflect what really happened.
Yeah. And Kristen, if I just gave bad advice, if the plan is that everything should be done in advance,
No.
that's great. Okay.
That was good. And I will just add, Kate, so another key piece and hopefully improvement to this form are, you can see in the middle screen, these buttons that say send visit 1 confirmation, send visit 2 confirmation. So it is important to, once you schedule that date, to click that. And this hopefully also improves the rescheduling process and notification process, because if you do have a change, you just come back to this form, update the date, and then you click that new confirmation reminder, that button. So that will drive the confirmation of the visit with the participant, but then there will also be a day before reminder that the participant will receive, which is automated. So that piece doesn't require any coordinator interaction. It's automated by the system that the participant will get another reminder right before the day before the visit.
Yeah, that's great. The visit 1 date field is also really critical in the first diet period, because the first time you save that, we'll talk a little bit about this in the future, but that's going to help us have the system assign which diet cohort that participant is linked with. So just remember that visit 1 date is really critical, and we'll come back to that in a couple of slides. Anything else to touch on here, Kristen?
I just see Shannon's question in the chat. So is the scheduling only changing for M2, M3 instance of REDCap and not for M1? So right now it is just M2, M3, and I think we want to see how it goes to see if, it would work better to go back to M1 and change it to this process. But for now, it is just M2, M3.
And Elaine, I see your question. If dates are changed on this form, does it mean the notification will be updated automatically? I'm going to defer to Kristen. Yeah.
Yeah, so it will, if you change any of the dates, so whether it's visit date, CGM application date, it will, as far as the participant receiving a notification, you do need to make sure to hit that send visit 1 confirmation so that they get the updated date. And then it will, when those dates are updated, which this will make sense, I think, in the next slide, it will automatically update in the reminder content for the participant.
Great. Okay. Oh, it didn't let me. Okay. Was there another piece that you wanted?
It might be a couple slides ahead. It was
okay.
I'll circle back to it.
No problem. Okay, great. So that's the diet period gateway form, which is going to be crucial to the success of the diet period working in the system. The visit gateway concept is still in effect, partially pulled off because the diet period gateway is so large that the visit gateway is really a place to get a couple different types of information. One, it does summarize what's been entered into the diet period, which you can see on the right. So it'll list in sort of visit 1, visit 2 for that diet period, as well as a couple of other things. And if the diet assignment has happened, it will be there. If it hasn't happened yet, it'll be a blank line. But as you're entering data in the system, that summary would update. But we sort of learned from last time that it was better to give coordinators power and to drive some of these other pieces. So for module 2 and 3, we have this in module 1 somewhat, but you'll see a recurring theme that the visit gateway will be a place you can go to check a box to release instruments to the participant on visit 1 and visit 2. So we felt like this was a way that you could manage it a little bit better based on different nuances that were going on when exactly the surveys are released to the participants, as opposed to making sure the right data has been entered. So hopefully that is an improvement. It will also have some guidance on dietary assessment schedule and the progress notes similar to module 1. So the visit gateways are making their comeback in module 2 and 3, much as they do in module 1. Okay. So now we're getting into some key activities that happen within the first visit first we have the dietary assessment randomization, and this should look very familiar. It's exactly the same as module 1. And I think there are a couple of lead-in questions that had changed in module 1 that are also going to be applied to module 2. But within each diet period on the first visit, you'll have this same randomization form. And so hopefully there aren't a lot of questions on this, but it'll be almost identical to module 1. And it's very critical this happen early because, again, it impacts the reminders, and this data is going to be critical for the system. So we ask you do that kind of early on the first visit. Daily reminders. I'll pass it back to Kristen.
Yeah, and this was where I was kind of hinting at why it's also important to make sure those dates are updated in the diet period gateway, because those do pipe into the daily reminders that the participants will receive. And so it's a little different. In module 1, we have listed out in each reminder, whether it's an email or text, each item they have to do. But for module 2 and 3, they're getting this message you can see on the left where it's just a link that will lead them to that reminder page that Kate also mentioned with the enhanced survey queue. So they'll go directly to their particular reminder page, which will automatically go based on their randomized method and the diet period that they're in, go to the correct one. And then these dates will be populated according to how they're populated in that diet period gateway. And because of kind of the dependency of when the CGM is applied, the reminders are set up kind of anchored by those different dates and what activities need to get done. So yeah, just another emphasis and reminder on keeping those dates up to date in the diet period gateway.
Awesome. Okay, so this slide and this concept could probably be its own training, and I think we do have planned to dive into this with the kitchens, and we could schedule a follow-up on this. But at a very high level, obviously a critical thing that happens in the module and the diet periods is the assignment of their cohort, and therefore the expected diet color and all of the foods that are going to go into the system to make this all work. So there's a form called Planned Foods form that you can see a little bit of a screenshot here, where at the top we'll have the diet period assignment color, and then there will be tables for each meal and snacks for that participant. So how this works is when the diet period has the visit 1 entered into it and you save it for the first diet period, we have a backend system that right now runs nightly. We might increase the frequency, but right now it runs nightly, where it will take that participant and the key information, base it on when module 2 launches, and assign the right cohort. It will then load in the diet food color for that diet period, as well as the future ones, and the days and the meals into the tables. Now we have a second process that runs hourly, and we separated these for a reason I'll get at in a moment, where it will take the data that's in the form and it will load the foods. Now, a really critical thing is there is a form called the food replacements form that if that has been updated or, well, I'll take a step back. There's a form called the food replacements form that does not have to be entered. But if the individual has some swaps that need to happen, and there are a list of allowed changes that can be made, and that form is designed around those decisions, what the second process that's called the meal component updater, which we've been calling the MCU, which has unfortunate overlap with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but neither here nor there. The MCU will run and load in the foods, considering the swaps and all of the data that's been in there. Now, the reason we separated these is we understand a lot of things could happen. So what this means is if something has changed, it would be very easy. You log a ticket, and what we would do is clear the foods, which is a fairly easy operation, make the changes you want, and this MCU will load in a new color or will make the changes that need to happen depending on your use case. And it gives us a lot of flexibility to be able to support you in making sure the right foods for that participant are in this table, or in these tables. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, we can talk about this in a lot more detail, but this is a really critical step because these foods end up loading into that participant's dietary adherence daily log. That's going to end up being really important to being track what's going on with that participant. Questions about this? Okay.
I have a quick question, Kate.
Great.
I was just wondering if we need to adjust someone's calorie intake and let's say add maybe 1 or 2 unit foods, how would we be doing that? Would we also run the MCU, or is there another form?
Great question. So I think right now, and I'll have to refresh my memory. We didn't put this in the slides, and we're going to get into that, I think, a little bit with the kitchen slides. But it also, you can add to any of these foods in these days. So it wouldn't be hard for you to add additional foods to this table as well. But hopefully it does the bulk of the work for you by loading in what you expect.
I see. That makes sense. Thanks.
Okay. But yeah, you could always add to this as well, and that would be good. Okay. Energy calculations. Okay. So this is a form that's meant to be kind of a worksheet for the coordinator or the kitchen staff. And the way this works right now, and I'll just caveat that I think the kitchens might still have feedback on this, and so this might change slightly. But the way this works right now is that the form at the top will load in the data from module 1 that it is collected related to all the fields for the calculation. The second section of the form is the same fields defaulted to what we got from module 1, but allows you to make any changes you need. So for example, in these calculations, sex is expected to be binary, but in the questionnaire, it has 5 options. It's male, female, intersex. None of these describe me, prefer not to answer. So we can't pre-populate that. And it's up to your discretion to make a decision on what is more appropriate for this participant. And there are, you know, if it's been a significant amount of time, you might want to reevaluate or change what's in here. But this allows you it's defaulted with the information we have, but it gives you a lot of flexibility to make changes you might need. And then at the bottom, the subsequent calculations will be done based on the data that you have modified and entered. The Mifflin will also show up if the appropriate range is met in the data. You can't see that in the screenshot, but I should have put it in the screenshot. But just trust me, if the calculations indicate that the Mifflin needed to be done, that would appear via branching logic. And then it allows you to enter the additional information for that diet period that you might need to enter. Okay, dietary adherence. So this I had hinted at before is driven from that planned foods form and all of those back-end processes that try to make this as accurate as it possibly can be, where every day the participant will get a dietary adherence form. And it will load in the foods that we have in those food tables for each meal. And the way it works is that it will ask, did you eat all these foods? If they say yes, that's all they have to do for that meal. If they say no, it will show each individual element and they will say about how much they ate relative to that meal, so that we can get a qualitative understanding of, you know, how much they're eating and what's going on. Now, the reason that's important, as you all know, we'll get to that in a moment. Of course, then there is a form called the weight M2 form, which allows the weights at every meal pickup to be logged. And you'd return to this form each time you're gathering a weight for each meal pickup, so that the weights can be tracked over time. And there is the reason that all of that is important, of course, is for the adherence counseling. So there's 2 forms in this adherence counseling. One is the meal pickup adherence check. M2 is the name of the form that you can see here on the left. So you can give a little bit of information about the meal pickup. You can see the weight changes. It's piped over from the weight form, just in case that's relevant. And there's a link to the adherence counseling form. So the adherence counseling form contains a summary of all the information that we've gathered from the participant in those daily logs. So you can see a snapshot here of sort of day 1, the status of the log is completed. Here are the list of the foods and the percentage eaten based on how they entered it, and some responses that were provided. It also allows for, it annotates if the participant indicated they had non-study foods, and a lot of other information can be entered and reviewed. Now, this is probably for the kitchen dietitian staff, but we thought it was worth going through this as well, since it's such a key part of the system. Okay, so obviously there's a lot in those last couple slides that are really important to the study. So if anyone has questions about any of those pieces, I'm happy to pause for a moment. Okay.
The only thing I'll add to is that participants will also get a second automated notification if they haven't completed their daily adherence log. So again, nothing needed from the coordinators to drive that, but they will get that automated notification.
Great, very good point. Okay, so now we're getting back into territory that's very similar to Module 1, where the device management form is actually going to be almost identical to Module 1, except what's really critical, and we thought this would be easier, so we welcome feedback on if you agree with us, but we have one device management for the whole module. So it's one form that you'd come back to, and the way that that works is we've added a question, oops, I went too quick. We've added a question to the beginning of the different device tracking forms to say diet period. This way you have one list and log of all the devices that are going back and forth for this participant in one place. It's also hopefully helpful that we worked it out so it could be the same ID across the, from Module 1 to Module 2, across the different devices. And we've worked with each of the groups to make sure there's a way to separate the Module 1 and Module 2 data that's coming in. So again, it'll be very similar. It'll just live in the admin event since it's going to be related to all of the diet periods. And hopefully that will be easier process than having to dig around and find where to go to sort of manage the devices and administer them as needed. And then the final status, this is going to be really important. There is a final status for the entire module. And to remind folks of the final status form, it's in Module 1, there's only one of them. And it's a really critical place to capture how things ended in the module for that participant. So it could be that they completed the study. It could be that they withdrew. It could be a lot of different things. But we have an overall final status that's relevant to, you know, where they ended up with the entire module. So when they finish all 3 diet periods, you'd have to come back here and indicate that they have completed the module. And we have diet period final statuses to really reflect what happened within that diet period, because we know there might be a lot of nuances around the diet period. Life happens, things happen. So it'll be a good way to sort of separate, you know, treating the diet period as a unit and the entire module as a unit to understand where people are. And finally, we are going to be giving everybody demo access so you can walk through this yourself. So there's a link here to where the demo system will be, the name of the project, and Kristen, Tucker, or Sophie, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, but I believe we're loading in a test record for each individual. So you will get access, and when you go in, your test record will be your name. And so when you go in, you'll be able to find your name and walk through these steps and work through the entire process. It will be as if you have started the project or you had been pushed from Module 1 into the Module 2. So you'd want to start and go through consent and then get into the ARM 2 and move forward from there. So hopefully that will be a good test. And as you're working through it, as usual, if you have questions, please reach out to the help desk or myself, Kristen, Sophie, or Tucker. We all we have access to that email, so you'll get us via that. Although I think that email listed on there is wrong. We'll fix that. Yeah, it should be at nutritionforprecisionhealth.org. But hopefully you all know the help desk email at this point, but we'll get that updated on the slides. And that is it, which I can't believe we got through all that in such a short amount of time. I feel like that means I talked too quickly, but we can now open it up for questions.
I had a quick question for, I can't remember the name of the form, but there was a form between Module 1 and Module 2, and it asked to release all that data. There was a section that said date specimen was collected, and that's all it said. And then on the next line, it showed a hemoglobin reading. Is that for the hemoglobin that it's talking about?
That is a great question. You are very detailed. You mean you saw it on the screenshot? Let me look myself. Hold on.
Okay.
It may have been the reflection of a test data screenshot. but let me double check. And Tucker, you might know that off the top of your head, but let me look.
So if it's from that list of data that's actually getting pushed over, that is a binary yes, no for whether or not the test was done or whether or not the value was over a certain amount. And you get a blank underline when there wasn't data to push in the first place.
Yeah, and I'm going to pull the slide up really quick. I think Chelsea was asking about a specific question and what data it was, which we can improve these labels, and hopefully you can see my screen. It's probably
Right
too
there.
small now.
Yeah.
Is it date specimen processed? Is that what you're
Yeah.
asking?
Yeah.
Do you know which field that was, Tucker? I don't know off the top of my head.
Oh, so I thought that had to do with the hemoglobin result.
Okay.
But I think we could probably add
We'll
information to
clarify.
that. Yeah.
We'll
Yeah,
clarify that field and make sure it's more clear.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, the one that it was set up on the weight where it showed the weight and then the date it was collected, like that seems pretty clear. If we could just reflect it that same way.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
We can do that.
Good feedback. Thanks, Chelsea. Okay, any other questions? I'm sure they'll come up as you're working through it. If there's not, we can always give you time back, but also happy to answer any other additional questions you might have.
Can I ask an additional question?
Of course.
I was gonna submit a help desk ticket about this, but is there any way for the module 1 for us to get rid of the version 2 informed consent? I'm just worried about people incorrectly clicking in there. I was wondering if we could just make that invisible.
So for any site that there are no participants that could possibly need version 2, I think the plan is to make that invisible. And let me revisit our timeline on that. So that's a really good point. I think that is part of our plan. But if you are in that position now, we can try to address that.
Okay. Yeah, I believe we are. So that'd be great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Perfect. All right. Well, we very much appreciate all of your time. If there are no other questions, feel free to get some time back. You can always reach out to us directly as well if more questions come up. But yeah, thank you all for your time. Hopefully this was helpful.
Thank you.